Hey there, you little rascals. Welcome back to a new video on my channel. Today we're taking a look at some fresh class tuning from the PTR of patch 12.1. There are some buffs again. Among other things, Druids have something to be happy about again. They're tinkering with demon hunters, and so there's a lot going on. Let's briefly summarize the changes at this point. Important, all of this is from the latest PTR build from this week, from the 7th. That's when it all went online. Until the patch is released, which will probably be in August, there will definitely be some more changes. So if your class isn't that strong right now, don't worry about it. A lot can still happen until then. Otherwise, if you want to support me, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Remember, at 38,000, there will be a big giveaway. We're not that far off from that, so I'd really appreciate it, and with that, let's get started. So these are the PTR patch notes. And now we're mainly going to focus on the individual change talents and abilities. In some cases, modifiers have been changed here. That can be a bit unclear sometimes. For example, this would now mean that Blur, the Demon Hunter ability, has its effectiveness reduced by half in PvP. However, it's always a bit tricky whether it actually ends up that way if there aren't explicit PvP notes included. That's why we'll just leave these things as they are for now. We have Vengeance, the Sigil of Chains. Overall, the cooldown has been reduced there from a 1.5 minute cooldown to 1 minute. And here as well, with this improved Sigil of Misery, the cooldown will be reduced by 15 and 30 seconds respectively. For the Balanced Druid, for example, there are also a few aura modifiers here that would indicate generally more damage. Whether that's actually the case in the end is hard to say. Astral Communion. And the talent positions was simply changed. That means they're now in a different spot in the tree. It gets more interesting when you take a look at the Feral Druid here. There are 4 talents that have been changed overall. Blood Spattered ultimately gives you more damage. So for each target affected by your bite, it's 8% instead of 2%. However, it now only stacks up to 6 times. If we do 8 times 6, that's 48%. Before it was a maximum of 10 stacks, but only 2%, so that's a decent damage gain. Merciless Claws now deals 25 more damage instead of 20, and also 25 more damage against bleeding targets. So, here's a damage buff. Rampant Ferocity, on the other hand, got nerfed. And Taste for Blood. If you've taken that talent, your Ferocious Bite will generally deal more damage. But during your Tiger's Fury, the damage was reduced by 4, so this is the philosophy that Blizzard had. More consistent damage outside of cooldowns. Not as crazy during cooldowns anymore. That's actually described pretty well here. Then we have a few more talents here. Nothing much has changed here. They just changed the proc trigger. It gets more interesting here. Elun's Chosen. Bask in Moonlight. Now it only increases the damage of Star Surge by 5% instead of 10%. Lunar Calling is 120% instead of 100%. So that's a small single target buff. And Shred has also been buffed. Then we have Evoker. It's basically just aura everywhere. Auras that have been modified. What that means in the end, we will see. So it's really very hard to say what it actually means when it just says, well, value 18 instead of 9. I think that's something where you'd need to have internal data to be able to figure it out. For the Hunter, Explosive Shot is getting buffed, so Marksmanship, that talent hasn't really done much damage lately anyway. It got a hefty buff once, and now there's another 30 more damage on top of that. And then there's also this Salvo talent, which lets you fire another explosive shot. There too, the damage has been increased to 230. So, explosive shot, more damage in the future. Whether that will end up being a viable alternative, we will see. For the Arcane Mage, we have Expanded Mind, which has been changed. Now, when you cast your orb, you only get 1 stack of Arcane Barrage instead of 2. Orb Mastery. There have been some changes there as well. Now, when you shoot out this Arcane Orb, you also fire 2 additional orbs with 50% effectiveness. So before it was apparently just 1 orb with 100%, now it's 2 with 50%. How much this will change things in the end, I have no idea. And there's a new talent, Refractive Images. Keep in mind, for example, that the names of these new talents don't exist in German yet. 10% of any damage you would take is instead taken over 8 seconds. And when you activate your mirror images, this effect is increased to 30 for 15 seconds. So that actually sounds like a pretty good defensive talent. Then we have Polished Focus here. When you fire your Arcane Barrage with 20 or more stacks of this salvo, you get 3 stacks replaced instead of 5 like before, so that's a slight nerf. The nerf to Improved Blazing Barrier now gives you an additional charge. So it's no longer that the barrier absorbs more, but you can use it a second time right after. The same goes for Ice Barrier and the same for Prismatic Barrier. That actually sounds pretty nice at this point. Here with the Monk, it's just a few multipliers again, just like with the Paladin. However, here we see the Shield of the Righteous cost. So in the future, 900 more mana. Avenging Crusaders healing there is reduced by about 25%. So the healing that spills over to other players from the damage. And Pillars of Light will scale almost 200% better with your spell power in the future. From 390 to 586%. So you'll get significantly more healing from that. Otherwise, you can see here 30 talents that have basically just been moved to different talent positions. So quite a lot has changed for the Paladin. A lot has been swapped back and forth. We also have the Priest here. Here we see Holy Words, Sanctify, and Serenity. They were recently buffed, and they're also getting another small buff on top of that. Corrupted Apparitions are those little shadow things that fly toward the enemies. In the future, they'll do 140 of your spell power instead of 60, so a small buff for Shadow here. We still have Rogues. Audacity increases the damage of ambush by 60%. Hidden Opportunity still reduces energy costs, so we definitely have a damage buff here. This talent, Gormor's Bite, has been completely restructured. The initial damage is lower, but now there's a bleed effect added. So, this effect where your next 3 finishing moves cost no energy. That has been changed. Shadowcraft will give you an extra combo point in the future instead of energy. And then we're at Shaman now. Here, a lot of auras have been changed and so on and so forth. Otherwise, nothing of substance, I'd say. For the Hellcaller Warlock, Blackened Soul does more damage. Seeds of the Demise does more damage. Wither does more damage for all specs. So that's across the board. Buffs for all specs. And last but not least, we have Warrior again. First, Arms. The talent Tactical Edge gives you an immediate charge of sudden death. So you can then cast your Execute. Best Served Cold ensures that in the future, when you dodge or parry and your auto attacks make it so that Revenge doesn't cost any rage. So it was expanded to include auto attacks, and finally we also have the Ravager here. It looks like enemies will now take an extra 25 lightning damage from this in the future, so it's been increased from 25 to 50, and this thing now chases its enemies. So like, oops, placed it wrong, damn. So it's kind of lagging behind now. So all in all, pretty nice stuff. Buffs for Warlocks, Shadow Priests, Feral Druids, and so on and so forth. There's quite a bit in there. Let's see how it all turns out in the end. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next video, and take care.